sanctuary of steel presence.
The Our Father, the Lord's Prayer, is short enough to be memorized by a child and deep enough to absorb a lifetime. It functions at once as a prayer to be prayed, a catechism to be learned, and a pattern of spiritual transformation. It trains the mouth to speak rightly to God, and in doing so, trains the heart to want rightly. It is also a bridge between heaven and earth. Its opening lines lift the mind toward God's transcendence. Its closing petitions descend into daily necessity, moral repair, and spiritual struggle. In this sense, the prayer is not a random list of requests. It is an ordered map of life, from God, to God, through the necessities of creaturely existence, toward the restoration of communion. The prayer functions in the New Testament as both authorized wording and formative pattern. In Luke, it arises from a pedagogical moment. Lord, teach us to pray, Luke 11:1, which frames it as a paradigmatic instruction. In Matthew, it appears within the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 6, explicitly contrasted with ostentatious prayer and many words, Matthew 6, 5-8, which frames it as a corrective to distorted religious performance. In both settings, the prayer is not simply a list of requests. It is a compressed theology that orders desire, reorients social identity, and articulates a moral and spiritual anthropology. The prayer is an ordered sequence rather than a set of interchangeable clauses. It begins with God's identity and purposes, then turns toward human needs, material, moral, and spiritual. This order itself is hermeneutically significant. It suggests that Christian petition is properly grounded in divine holiness, divine reign, and divine will, and only then moves to sustenance, forgiveness, and deliverance. It functions as a guide for inner life, addressing God, aligning the will, and forming the soul for the disciplined work of mercy, resistance, and endurance. Our Father. The first word is already theology. Our. The prayer is not merely private. Even when prayed alone, it is prayed as a member of a people. It assumes a shared belonging, not as a slogan, but as a discipline. One cannot honestly say our while intending to live as if one were spiritually self-sufficient or morally unrelated to others. The prayer, therefore, begins by dissolving a certain illusion of modern spirituality. My journey, my truth, my path, and replaces it with communion. Then comes Father. Here the prayer risks misunderstanding. It does not claim that God is a father in the biological sense, nor does it sanctify every human fatherhood. It names God as the origin who is not indifferent, the source who is personal, intentional, and capable of being addressed. To pray, Father, is to claim that ultimate reality is not mute fate or cold mechanism. The universe is not finally an impersonal system. It is held within a living relation. This does not mean familiarity without reverence. The very next phrase guards the intimacy. Who art in heaven. Heaven here is not a location in the way a planet is a location. It signifies God's otherness, the divine mode of being that is not confined by our limits. The prayer, therefore, balances two truths. God is near enough to be called Father and high enough to shatter our projections. We do not pray to a magnified version of ourselves. We pray to the one whose life exceeds the categories that imprison our imagination. This clause also quietly relativizes earthly power. If God is in heaven, then no regime, ideology, or human authority occupies the ultimate throne. The prayer begins as a reorientation, It moves the axis of the soul away from whatever seems most urgent in the moment and toward what is truly foundational. Hallowed be thy name. A striking feature appears. The first petition is not, help me. It is worship-shaped. Hallowed means made holy or treated as holy. But God does not become holier because we honor him. Rather, we ask that his holiness be recognized, reflected, and not profaned, especially in us. This is where the prayer becomes morally serious. To ask that God's name be hallowed is to ask that our lives do not drag the divine name into hypocrisy. The petition is therefore both cosmic and personal. That God be known as God, and that the ones who claim to belong to him live in a way that does not lie about him. In many traditional readings, name also means the revealed character. The petition becomes, may the world learn who you truly are, and may I learn to speak and act in a way that makes your character credible. Thy kingdom come. This is not a request for an escape hatch out of history. It is a request for God's reign, God's order, justice, and life to take effect. The kingdom is not merely a future event. It is the inbreaking of divine governance into present reality, beginning with the interior kingdom of the heart and extending outward to life in community. The petition has a double edge. On the one hand, it is hope. The world is not locked into its current brutalities. The last word belongs to God. On the other hand, it is judgment. If the kingdom comes, then rival kingdoms, especially the small tyrannies we build in ourselves, must be challenged. To pray for the kingdom is to invite God's rule over the places we prefer to keep sovereign. Grudges, lusts, pride, despair, and the subtle ways we demand that reality orbit around our will. This petition also gives the prayer its eschatological tension. The kingdom has been announced and is already at work, yet it is not fully manifest. The Christian life is lived inside that tension, already and not yet. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Here, the kingdom becomes concrete. Will does not mean arbitrary divine preference. It means the divine intention that corresponds to the good. Heaven signifies the realm in which God's will is perfectly realized. Earth is the realm of resistance, fracture, and confusion. The petition is therefore a request that the alignment of heaven be reproduced here. But the most uncomfortable truth is this: the first battlefield of earth is the human heart. The petition is not mainly about persuading God to do something. It is about asking that we become capable of obedience, capable of willing the good even when the good contradicts our impulses. Traditional writers often point out an implicit sequence. You cannot honestly ask for God's will if you cling to the fantasy that your will is the measure of things. This is where the prayer becomes an instrument of interior liberation. It loosens the soul from compulsions and trains it to desire the good not merely as an ideal, but as a lived reality. Give us this day our daily bread. Only now do we descend into bodily need. The prayer does not despise matter. It does not pretend that spirituality is pure interiority. It asks for bread, plain, essential, unromantic. This is a critique of two extremes: the pride that pretends to be self-sustaining and the mysticism that wants to float above creaturely dependence. Daily can be read in more than one way. At minimum, it means, give what is necessary for today and teach us not to be devoured by anxious futurism. It invites trust that does not deny prudence but refuses obsession. Many classical readers also hear Eucharistic resonance. Bread as the food of life, the sustenance of communion. Even if one does not foreground sacramental theology, the prayer still suggests that the human being needs more than calories. We need a nourishment that is simultaneously physical, relational, and spiritual. The bread of life, the bread of meaning, the bread of God's presence. The plural returns. Give us. My bread is not simply mine if my neighbor starves. And forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. The prayer now turns to moral reality, not in abstract terms, but in the lived economy of debt, injury, and release. Trespass implies crossing a boundary, violating the proper shape of love. It recognizes sin not merely as a private flaw, but as relational rupture. The shocking element is the comparison. As we forgive. This is not a claim that human forgiveness purchases divine forgiveness, as if God were a reluctant banker. Rather, the prayer assumes a profound congruence. If we refuse forgiveness, we contradict the very mercy we ask to receive. Forgiveness is not an optional spiritual ornament. It is the logic of life in God. This petition is where the prayer becomes dangerous. Forgiving others is not sentimental. It is often costly. It can involve grief, truth-telling, boundaries, and time. Yet the prayer insists that the heart cannot remain a fortress and also become a temple. To pray this line is to ask God to heal the places in us that cling to injury as identity. At its deepest, the petition reveals an anthropology. The human soul is not a sealed unit. What we do with mercy shapes our capacity to receive mercy. A heart that permanently refuses to release becomes a heart that cannot breathe the air it claims to desire.
And lead us not into temptation. This line can trouble modern ears, as if God were a tempter. But the tradition has often understood lead in a permissive sense. Do not let us be brought into the trial in a way that overwhelms us. Do not abandon us to the force of temptation. Guide us away from the precipice. Temptation is not merely the invitation to do something naughty. It is any pressure that draws the heart away from the good, whether through pleasure, fear, pride, despair, or the slow corrosion of conscience. This petition acknowledges something spiritually honest. Left to ourselves, we are more fragile than we like to admit. We can rationalize almost anything. We can be captured by a story that flatters us. We can be worn down. So the prayer asks for guidance, sobriety, and protection. It is the opposite of spiritual arrogance. It is the confession that vigilance is needed and that grace is not optional. But deliver us from evil. The prayer ends not with a small improvement project, but with cosmic seriousness. Deliverance. Evil here can be understood both as evil in general and the personal dimension of spiritual opposition. Either way, the petition recognizes that human life is contested. There are forces, internal and external, that seek to deform the good. Evil is not only an external threat, it is also an interior gravity, a way of being that can slowly colonize the heart. The pleasure of contempt, the habit of lying to oneself, the enjoyment of domination, the numbness that treats persons as objects. Thus, deliver us from evil is not merely defensive, protect us from external harms, but also formative. Save us from becoming evil. The petition presumes that evil is both a reality encountered and a possibility internalized. Deliverance, therefore, involves strength, clarity, and orientation, the capacity to resist what deforms the good. The prayer ends, significantly, not with a program of self-mastery, but with a request for rescue, an implicit claim about the human condition. Liberation is finally not achieved by technique alone, but by grace that empowers agency without collapsing into autonomy.
And it ends in a kind of open horizon. The prayer does not specify the form deliverance must take. It asks for deliverance itself, trusting that God's wisdom can accomplish it in ways we would not have designed. Doxology. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory. Whether one treats this as liturgical completion or textual expansion, it perfectly fits the prayer's inner logic. After petition comes praise. After need comes adoration. It returns us to the opening orientation. God is the origin, the ruler, and the end. Our lives, our bread, our forgiveness, our struggles, all of it exists within His sovereignty. To end in praise is not decorative. It is spiritually corrective. It prevents the prayer from becoming a mere list of anxieties. It seals the prayer with the recognition that God is not useful, He is worthy. Conclusion. The prayer as a school of the heart. Read verse by verse, the Our Father reveals itself as a deliberate formation of desire. It begins by relocating the soul in communion, our, and relation, Father, lifts the mind into reverence, in heaven, and then orders the heart toward what matters most, God's holiness, reign, and will. Only then does it ask for sustenance, reconciliation, guidance in trial, and rescue from evil. In other words, the prayer does not merely ask God for things, it remakes the one who prays. The petitions are not interchangeable. They are an ascent and descent, an arc of alignment. To pray the Our Father is to submit the entire human condition, worship, history, ethics, need, and conflict, to the governance of God. And that may be its central meaning. The Our Father is the shortest prayer that contains an entire worldview. It tells us who God is, who we are, what the world is for, what is broken, how it is healed, and why hope is reasonable. It is less a spell to get results than a rule of life to become real.
So the next time you pray it, don't rush through it as a familiar script. Slow down. Take one line at a time, and let each petition become a small act of attention, almost a meditation. Where am I resisting your reign? What do I truly need today? Whom am I refusing to forgive? What temptation is shaping me? Then pray the words again, not as sound, but with assent. Try it for a week, or even for a single night, and notice what changes, what softens, what clarifies, what strengthens. And if you're ready, let the prayer do what it was always meant to do. Not merely be recited, but become real in you.
Your future is secure in the sanctuary of steel.